As our next speaker, I can announce Professor Said Munir Kazrou on stage. He was a keynote speaker as well on Monday evening. He gave already a very interesting keynote on the impact of climate change on health. Professor Kazrou is the founder and chairman of IPAC, the Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance, with presence in Bangladesh, India, Australia, Austria and the UAE. As an international think tank, IPAC undertakes research activities, promotes dialogue among stakeholders, and supports advocacy towards social justice. We welcome Professor Kazrou once more on stage.
Good evening, afternoon, morning, no matter which part of the world you are. It's a pleasure to be joining friends and colleagues both in Dubai, UAE, and around the world. The topic on which I've been requested to speak is a little bit of reflection on the pandemic era. I mean, last time something any close to happen was Second World War. And even in Second World War, not every country, every individual was affected. In a way, those of us who are witnessing this probably will be a once-in-a-lifetime experience where there is not a single individual, family, neighborhood, community, society, nation, region, continent that has not been affected. So we stand here today, January 19, still fighting the pandemic. Recent surge of Omicron, as you know, has again put us back, and even many of the friends, colleagues who would have joined us chose to stay home. So we are not out of the woods yet. And one of the things that at times I feel sad about, how much we really have stepped back, paused, and reflected what are some of the lessons these last 2 years have given us. It's a very legitimate demand, expectation. We are in a rush to go back to normalcy, work, education, travel, tourism. But in our rush to doing so, my fear is we are missing out on many of the once-in-a-lifetime lessons. So before I go further, for those of us who are present, may I request you to please stand for 10 seconds, and those who are in different parts of the world, just in memory of those we lost, and in prayer for those who are still suffering. Would you be kind enough, John, for 10 seconds, please? Thank you so much. Now, this is an event we can speak hours, days, but time is limited. So I'll try to focus on some of the 5 key things which I think at least we should care to pay attention. If you remember, end of 2019, beginning 2020, when it all started, we still were not aware what this virus is about. We're busy fighting from where it started, China, not China. While we're debating this, people were losing their lives. And we live in amazing times. Imagine just before the pandemic, technology, digital revolution, social media, making the journey to the space. 4th industrial revolution. We human beings, for very legitimate reasons, felt very empowered, felt very powerful, felt we are invincible. It took a tiny little particle weighing less than 1 ounce to push us back and tell us how equally helpless, vulnerable, exposed we can be. And a little more than a gram of this virus is enough to wipe out all the 7 to 8 billion people. So this is a great occasion for us, human beings, to be a little more humble, to look into ourselves as much as we legitimately take pride into our achievements. It's also a good occasion to look back how things can be different. So I'll start first with, I said the first 5 things. First is I've alluded to that the sheer helplessness. No matter how rich or resourced we have been, we have seen struggling for oxygen. We have seen ventilators running out of supply even in the most developed country. We have seen heads of governments who make a joke out of it, themselves on the brink of losing their own life. So a flashback just 18 months back will tell you what was happening. This is something we have seen again and again in the media. But for the sake of today's occasion, just look at the sheer helplessness that was happening. Now, the second part. We humans have always risen to the occasion. The worst of times brought out the best of us. And we saw an ever-ending compassion, kindness, sacrifice that happened across borders. And first and foremost, I'm sure all of you will agree, were the frontline workers, the health service providers who risk their lives every day to save our lives. And while their families sweated thinking whether their loved ones will come back, our families put our faith and hope in those hands of kindness and compassion. So these are the frontline. Then we had many, many small acts of kindness. Whether it was children playing music for the elderly.
From the virus and the world. Dressed in their best, the 6 and 9-year-old delight.
Or people coming online Zoom to raise their spirit, being locked down, connected in laptops. And starting from children, if you remember, there was a gentleman close to 100 years old, Captain Tom Moore, a retired British army personnel, who walked in his backyard day after day, raising fund for British National Healthcare Service. So what started with a £1,000 commitment ended up being a £1 million endowment. So these are small glimpses. I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands this happened. So this was also a great occasion for people across the world to come together. And just as the enduring compassion, kindness from children to elderly helped save the day, what also is true, we human beings have been tampering with nature far too long, far too much. All of you are aware of COP26 in Glasgow, and not so hopeful conclusion, because most of the countries could not come into that agreement to keep temperature below 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. And even the net zero target 2050, some of the countries did not sign up to. When this pandemic forced us to be at home, locked in, nature got a sigh of relief. And during this time, global carbon emission came down by 6%. We will go back to normalcy. We will go back to full activities as we used to. But had we not done that, by 2030, the emission would have come to 30%. And the reality is, as much as we can be cruel, so can be nature. And it can be merciless, whether it's eating away the many small, low-lying countries like Maldives or Marshall Islands, or many of the countries exposed to natural disasters. So nature could come back, and during the last 2 years, we saw cyclone, floods, wildfire.
Everything is so dry here, and it's been drying out for, 2 years, so it's very volatile. And
the entire world needs for its survival.
By the 1990s, it seemed like it was too late.
The destruction.
But when left alone, nature speaks for itself. And many of a neighborhood, I'm sure, when you stepped out of your home, the calmness and tranquility that you saw in your own neighborhood, in the streets that you use every day to go to your workplace, was different. And even the animals and birds who we have successfully pushed into border sprung back into life.
Accelerate.
Empty streets, silent cities, closed factories and quiet skies are now dominated by animals and birds all over the world.
My fourth reflection, vaccine. Well, when we have been living in a world where the requirement for every 1,000 patients is at least 3 physicians, 140 countries don't have that ratio. When the requirement is 4 hospital beds for 1,000 patients, the current reality is less than 1 hospital bed. And no wonder what we saw happening. People struggling to get a hospital bed. Even in developed countries, oxygen running out. So the reality is, while we do not hesitate to spend billions of dollars in the arms that we will never use, when it comes to saving our own life, we have been very miserly. And this pandemic has exposed the frailty, the inner flaw, the inherent weaknesses of our thought process spanning over decades. It didn't happen on a sudden. The pandemic did us a great favor by exposing who we are, by showing how reckless we can be spending billions on arms and ammunition that we hardly use, and mostly when we use for wrong purposes, while we do not spend money on health infrastructure. And today, even as we speak, Omicron is today because of us. Because at the beginning, 7 countries representing only 13% of global population were controlling more than 50% of the vaccines. So while many of us are getting ready for the 3rd shot booster, not 10% of Africa is vaccinated. So no wonder when something pops up in South Africa, finds its way so quickly that today in UK and US, every day 2,000 cases are rising, and US already has 70 million people affected. We are paying the price of our own sins. And this vaccine has been a disgrace. How, when people died, suffered, the leaders were fighting with each other, over petty issues, trade restriction, IPs. I mean, we are not talking about an iPhone, that as if you give this license to somebody and Apple suffers. We are talking about life-saving technology which can save millions. We failed to rise to the occasion. And just as very aptly said by the Director General of WHO,
a small group of countries that make and buy the majority of the world's vaccines control the fate of the rest of the world.
The fifth one, technology. Imagine if we didn't have this online connectivity platform, how we would have survived this. Today, online shopping, e-commerce have boomed. Sitting at the comfort of our own home, we can order anything we want. Healthcare services, education, all has gone digital. And this is the future. So even when we move to the post-pandemic years, some of the things will be irreversible. And technology has been a lifesaver. And even in that, again, the reality is, while all of us sitting in this room have smartphones, have access to the best of devices, even today, 2 billion people in the world don't have internet access. 3 billion people do not have any mobile phone. And we are talking about big numbers. But yes, technology did save our day. No, I'm sure many of you will say there were many, many other things that should have been talked about. Sure, but time is limited. I picked 5 which, in my opinion, deserved our attention, deserved our reflection. And at some point, when we leave it behind, we move on. I would strongly urge, as I said in the beginning, please step back as an individual, as a family, as a community, and ask ourselves what we could have done differently. Where did we miss the line? Why did we shy away when we needed to do something? Why didn't we speak when we saw what was happening in front of our eyes? That is a reflection we all need to. And I always love simplifying complex things. And in the same spirit, I think what I'm going to share with you, some of you may have seen it, but nonetheless, I'll share it in any case. A small conversation between a father and a child. I think that captures more or less the essence of what I've been trying to tell you. Listen.
But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden, amidst the fear and all the while, the people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you. Some people started dancing. Some were singing. Some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we'd left behind.
Why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization.
This is a piece I wrote. Feel free to visit www www.covidthoughts.org. It has all the elaboration. I'll conclude by saying, let's dream big, act bold, and never give up. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.